Yes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So this is the third class?
Yes.
Out of 6. We're up to the chapter 7, for those of you who have the text, page 123. It's also on the screen. Concerning the death of the Prophet's father ﷺ and his wet nurses. Not the death of his wet nurses, but the death of his father and his wet nurses. So you need like a comma there, like Oxford comma they call it. So موت والد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وذكر مرضعاته. So here we're going to see about the Prophet's father ﷺ, and that he died while the Prophet ﷺ was still in the womb of his mother, Amina bint Wahb. And there will be some discussion of who were the wet nurses of the Prophet ﷺ, or the murdi'at. Well, the murdi'at is the one who nurses the baby. And you might say, why is that significant? Why does he mention it here in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ? Several reasons. One of them being that it was the custom of the Arabs during the time of the Prophet ﷺ that they would hire out wet nurses to take the baby and nurse them in their first 2 years. The Quran mentions that the nursing period for a baby is 2 years from the time of birth. And then after the 2 years, there's no more nursing period. And there are even legal rulings that apply because of nursing. So if 2 babies nurse from the same breast, then they become like brother and sister, or brother and brother, or in other words, as if they have a familial relationship. So that leads us to the second reason. It was Arab custom, and 2, one can infer from the verses of the Quran that, as well as the legal rulings, that the people that nurse you, or the woman that nurses the child, it's not just a breast of milk and then, there's no kind of significance attached to that. It is significant. In other words, there is something that's transferred from the mother to the baby when that happens. Or it's not the mother and it's a wet nurse, from the wet nurse to the baby, to the degree that Islam says, now this woman is like the mother, has the same maqam, or has the same place as the mother. So back then they were discerning in the people that would nurse the baby, because now it means that whatever children that woman has, they would be siblings of the baby that she nursed. So they were careful about that, right? Because if you do that too often, then you could, and it's a small village, then it winds up that everyone's related to one another and they can't marry one another. And actually, there are stories of this happening, right? Anecdotal things like, later on, 20 years later, they were going to get married. Oh, you know what? You guys nurse together. You can't do that. And they didn't know that from the beginning, and so forth. So he says here, بيان موت والد المختار وكم له كان من الأذآر. Now for a description of the death of the chosen one's father, al-Mukhtar, the Prophet ﷺ, and enumeration of the Prophet's, that's a mistake there, of his wet nurses. So dhi'r, or murdi'a, same thing. Dhi'r, though, with the dha, means someone you actually pay money to do that for you. So it's a rented wet nurse. Whereas a murdi'a is someone who, doesn't matter if they're getting paid or not paid to do it, anyone who nurses, regardless of payment. So every dhi'r is a murdi'a, but not every murdi'a is a dhi'r. So the is the plural of that, and they're the ones who, as I said, it was Arab custom back then for them to do that. So وَمَاتَ عَبْدُ اللَّهِ وَهُوَ line 43 وَهُوَ حَمْلُ وَكَمْ حَوَتْ مِنْ شَرَفٍ هُذَيْلُ. The next line goes with that. لَمَّا غَلَتْ بِنْتُهُمُ السَّعْدِيَّةِ مِنْ أُمَّهَاتِ أَشْرَفِ الْبَرِيَّةِ. So Abdullah died while the Prophet was in utero, in the womb. How many months along, he doesn't mention exactly, but we know that he died, the Prophet's father ﷺ, in Medina, where he was some of the relatives of his mother's family, because that's where they were from Bani Najjar in Medina. And it said that the burial place of the Prophet's father ﷺ is somewhere in Medina. Some people claim that they know where it is. Some of them say that it's underneath what is now the Haram, or the Medinian, the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. Again, we don't know exactly. We mentioned last week that our belief, or the week before last, that our belief concerning the parents of the Prophet ﷺ is that they're people of paradise, or at the very least, we don't know where they are. We don't say that they're in hellfire or anything like that. They died before the Prophet ﷺ actually could give da'wah to his own parents. So they are from amongst the people of al-Fatra, as we said, the people of the gap between the Prophet Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who are not held accountable. And that is a solid theological position of the majority of Muslims. So it's not like something that is, fringe belief, or kind of on the group of Muslims. No, it's something that is a majority position. And those who differ with that, they're not the majority. وَكَمْ حَوَتْ مِنْ شَرَفٍ هُذَيْلٍ لَمَا ضَلَتْ بِنْتُهُ. So, and what the honor of the clan of Hudayl, because Hudayl was the tribe of Sittina Halima, as a result of the daughter of the Sa'diyya being amongst the best of creation's mothers in milk. وَكَمْ رَأَتْ لَهُ مِنَ الْآيَاتِ حَلِيمَةٌ مِنْهَا دُرُورُ الشَّاةِ. How many clear signs Halima saw from him? So, it doesn't mention here specifically the story of Halima Sa'diyya Hudayliyya, but remember, a dhi'r is someone who's expected to get paid for nursing the baby. So the Prophet ﷺ's father passed away. That means his family doesn't have a lot of money, because the person they would depend upon for that is the father, and he's no longer there. So Sittina Amina gives birth to the Prophet ﷺ, and like the rest of the people of sort of the well-to-do or the noble people of Mecca, when they would get a wet nurse out from the Badiyah, from the countryside, because it was their belief that, village life, we can call it city life in Mecca, by our standards, is more like a village, is not conducive or is the best environment for the baby in the first 2 years of life. So they would have them go out to the Badiyah, where it's kind of fresher air and, that type of thing. So they didn't have, the Prophet ﷺ would not be someone people would be interested in that much, because they didn't have a lot to pay. So what had happened is all of the wet nurses, a particular assigned day, they went, and everyone got a baby who was born around the same time as the Prophet ﷺ, and nobody chose the Prophet ﷺ, because again, there wasn't a lot of money. And at the same time, it just happened to be that Halima had the slowest donkey. So she got there, the last person. Right? She gets there and everybody's finished. It's like you get to where the raffle, everyone's gotten their prize, and there's nothing left except the last one. And so the last one left was the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So she said, okay, he's the last one, whatever you can pay, that's fine. And she nursed him, and then as soon as she got on her donkey, she noticed this donkey has some fire in it now. Now it's not walking, it's running. And as she's on her way back, she's actually passing the people who went and, who got before her, and she's going by them. She's passing them on the way back. And she mentions that obviously she had her own baby, right, who would be now the brother of the Prophet ﷺ in Rida'ah, because they both nursed, the son of Halima. And it was actually mentioned later on that the Prophet ﷺ, he became Muslim and he treated him well, who was the brother of Halima, because that's his brother from Halima. So she said, when I would nurse my son, then I would go to nurse Prophet ﷺ, and I still had more than enough milk for the both of them, right? And she didn't eat much. Remember, people back then, they didn't have Starbucks and lots of meat and all this stuff around. You would be surprised about how little people ate. Even Aisha would mention that we ate so little that when we would go to relieve ourselves, that what would come out would be like little pebbles. It would be nothing, because we don't even eat that much to begin with. So she she said, you know, the donkey moved fast, and I was able to feed both of them, and they were both very satiated. And then she gets back to her kind of farm, more or less, where she had a camel. You know, people back then, if you wanted milk, and milk was kind of part of the staple diet, either you had to have a goat or a camel that you could milk. They didn't really have cows in order to have milk. And if you wanted meat, you'd have to have a group of goats or sheep or whatever it might be. And then you'd have to have land where they can graze and they can eat, right? Because if you don't have land where they can graze and eat, then what are they going to eat? You're not going to have any goats that are going to live, or camels. But in order for the land to be grazed upon, you need
Money.
huh?
Money to have that?
No money. How does what do goats and sheep eat off of the land?
Grass.
Grass. Where does that come from? You need to have
Water.
water. Water. No. Undergraduates, what? I don't understand. So you need water. So you need all of these things for things to work. And all of these things are what in the Arabian Peninsula? Scarce. That's why most people live a nomadic life, because once you deplete a particular area that had a grazing land, you got to go somewhere else. So that's why the Bedouin were constantly on the move. Very similar actually to the Native Americans, right? They were constantly on the move because they actually needed area for, you know, one, they were in search for the buffalo, but two, their own animals needed to graze, and they would move where the buffalo would go. So very similar culture and custom there. She was in short supply of all these things. She didn't have that much water, you know, the well, you know, only going to give so much. And then she'd have to irrigate the land, and all of these things that made her one of the people who was slow to get to the Prophet ﷺ, because the donkey was very skinny and didn't get to eat much because there wasn't enough grass and grazing and food to give it, and so she was the last one to get there. So all of these things were happening. Then when she gets back to her place, all of a sudden, the grass blooms. All of a sudden, the animals have more than enough to eat and become strong and healthy. All of a sudden, she has all of this milk coming out of her she-camel that she was, you know, for herself. So she saw all of this barakah and blessing. So this is what he meant by how many clear signs Halima saw from him. Among them was excessive flow of her sheep's milk, right? Her camel or whatever it might be. The sheep's milk was so much, right? When the animal wasn't doing very well before, but now, because of the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, all these things were happening. So when we talk about these type of signs of the Prophet ﷺ, like we saw, Persia's waters dried up and the fires of the Magians were completely extinguished right at his birth. Right? So these are mu'jizat, they're miracles. We don't call them mu'jiza though, we call them irhasat. Irhasat means kind of a precursor to the miracles actually happening, because our definition of miracle is that which is contrary to common experience, like something completely out of the ordinary, unexpected, but it is also done as a way to prove the prophecy of a particular prophet. So the prophet will say, this is the miracle, this is how I can prove that I am indeed who I say I am. Right? It's like Allah saying, you don't believe who He is? Well, look at this. Right? Like when Jesus spoke in the cradle, right? And He said, Inni Abdullah, I am the slave of Allah, the first words that came out of His mouth. So these are ways to show that this person is indeed a prophet, like they say. So at this time, the Prophet ﷺ was a baby. He wasn't saying I'm a prophet. So we don't say that they were miracles in that sense, but they were miraculous. All these things that were happening were miraculous and were signs, were ayat, right? And we will see later on, people took notice. People were beginning to take notice. Halima definitely took notice. She said, there's something mubarak, there's something very blessed about this baby. He is unlike any other babies. So she saw many of these signs that I just mentioned. So he stayed with Sittida Halima for a few years, and with 2 years, maybe 3 years had passed by, and then the next thing happened, which is mentioned in the next line. وَشُقَّ صَدْرُ أَكْرَمِ الْأَنَامِ وَهُوَ ابْنُ عَامَيْنِ وَسُدْسِ عَامٍ. Also the noblest of humanity's chest was split when his age reached 2 years and 2 months. So he was just about nearing the end of his time, or at least the nursing time, and two men came. It's described that two men came. They didn't know where they came from. They looked like men, but they were not men. They were angels. So these two angels came, and the Prophet ﷺ was a young boy, 2 years old, and he was playing with the other young boys. And he was playing with his brother from Rida, the son of Halima. And so they saw the two men came, and they took him, and they split open his chest. And he saw that. He ran back to his mother to tell her what had happened. But by the time she reached him, it had already been done. And what they did was they removed his heart, and they found, as in the narration goes, one black dot, which they cleaned, they scrubbed, and they moved it out, and they put his heart back in his chest and closed it. And it was as if nothing had ever happened. There was no scar, there was nothing like this. So obviously the Prophet as a young boy was shaken by this thing that had happened, and so was Halima, right? And now she was frightened. So she actually wanted to take the Prophet ﷺ back to his mother. But before that happened, he mentions here other times, not happened at this time, but there are other times that the Prophet ﷺ's chest was open and his heart was washed in a vessel of silver or gold. Some of them mentioned 3 times. The second time, as he mentions in this line, وَشُقَّ لِلْبَعْثِ وَلِلْإِسْرَاءِ أَيْضًا كَمَا قَدْ جَاءَ فِي الْأَنْبَاءِ. It was split again at the onset, or the outset of his prophetic mission. So right at the very beginning, Ghar Hira, sometime after that. And the night of Isra and Mi'raj. So when the Prophet ﷺ gets to Bayt al-Maqdis, before he goes to al-Mi'raj, he has to be put in a state where he can ascend the 7 heavens, and then he can see all the way up to Sidrat al-Muntaha, the farthest low tree, where even Gabriel cannot follow him, and then there when he has some type of immediate experience with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in order for him to be prepared for that, then there was a shaq al-sadr, or the splitting of the chest once again. So these things are all miraculous. We believe in them, not because we actually saw them ourselves, but because they have come down in sound narration. Right? And sound narration or sound transmission is one of the ways how we know things to be true. Right? And we know that not everything that we see and feel and touch and so forth is the only truth out there. Right? If we were to, and modernity wants you to reduce everything to empirical experience. So if it tells you, if you can't see it yourself, then it can't be real. It can't be true. And for us, what is unseen is much more, and in fact much more real than what we can see. We're very limited in terms of the things we can fathom empirically, right? The things we can measure, or we can taste, or we can see, or we can hear, right? And all it takes is for something to be a mile away and you can't see it. So for you, that's the unseen, right? All these things are happening a mile away. We have no idea about it. We can't hear it, we can't see it, nothing. So as human beings, we're quite limited to the extent that we can actually be aware of what things are going on. So why is it so surprising that there are things even beyond the 1 mile and 2 mile that no human being normally can hear them or see them or experience them, right? We know that the universe is constantly expanding and it's out there and there's things going out there. We don't have any way by which to know those things. We can send as many Hubble telescopes and all that type of thing, but that's so limited. It's still going to be something we can't truly fathom. So when we have sound transmission, when we have a group of people who've seen it